Good day, this is Ricardo Diaz, welcoming you to once again to talk about immigration. This is the CU Immigration Forum TV, but mostly it's a space where we can talk about immigration, to dialogue and to put forward some ideas that I hope you'll engage with and come to our website or to our meetings and share your opinion. Today, the topic of immigration within the U.S. goes a little bit beyond the borders. Those of you who have watched the show before have known that we, the Urbana-Champaign area, have hosted a couple of groups. So I want to contextualize those groups and then relate to you some of the gain that I have had in the last month in also visiting them and their situation. So it's hopefully not a boring travelogue of Russia, but some ruminations about the contrasts that I've begun to see. So let me start first with how this program started and how that might fit into the immigration work that we do in this area. So I want to show you and switch to the screen so I can show you. We have, let me think, about 2 years ago, well, 2.5 years ago, there was a chance encounter of immigration, of CU immigration folk. Our group was quite young still, but in the picture you see Tom, who is now our president, Jill, who has since moved away to St. Louis, myself, and Lydia Grafova, who is a Russian journalist who was visiting. On the left is sociology professor from the U of I, and she was the go-between in that Lydia wanted to talk to groups that spoke about it, that did work with immigrants in the area. So Cindy brought Lydia. We didn't speak each other's language, so she was gracious enough to also interpret. And we had a discussion as to what we each do. Lydia at the time was, how can I say, we didn't know each other at all, and so she asked some very basic questions about what the immigrant experience was here in the U.S. And then we also spoke on where she came from. So she directed a group of immigrant groups across the nation, and so therefore she was running essentially a forum like we've tried to do, different groupings that work on immigration and bring them all together so we can dialogue and, if not cooperate, at least coordinate each other's space. So Lydia then, it was an interesting moment in which she asked us, so where is your office? And we told her at the time, we have no office space. And we meet virtually. We set up the meetings and then we go meet wherever it may happen. And usually it's at the University Y, but Channing Murray Foundation, a cafe, somebody's home. The meetings are just the time in which we get some face-to-face. The work does not require an office necessarily. And then she says, how interesting, she says, after so many years, a decade of having an office ourselves, we just lost it. And we're back to working from my apartment, from my flat, she says. And so that really united us. We were definitely on the ground and battling things with the same kind of resources. So anyway, that was 2 years ago. And essentially a year later, or a few weeks later, we got a call back from Cindy, who invited us, the Immigration Forum, to come to see at the Eurasia Foundation. I'll show you on screen. The Eurasia Foundation is a grouping of individuals that seek to work in that part of the world that really is Eurasia. And now I understand it. Europe is not a continent in that it has a physical border like the Americas or Australia. Asia and Europe are one big landmass. And so they work in the countries that are in that middle. And I'll show you that in just a little bit more. But they sponsored a conference that we went to. Well, actually, Jill was supposed to go to, but I ended up going Not very willingly, I must tell you. My Russian was and probably a little bit less than inexistent now, but I had no interest. But I did to represent us. And so we went to a conference that now is called C, the U.S.-Russia Social Expertise Exchange. And as you can see from this screen, the conference divides itself into several working groups, and one of them is migration. So the migration group, as the name entails, is an opportunity to talk about the topic, but seen from two different points of view. The U.S. is the largest receptor of immigrants, but Russia, the Russian Federation, is the second largest receptor in the world. And so we had things to talk about, and I didn't know that. So after spending 3 days with these folks, I realized that I had a lot to learn about. So what is it that we do, and why do we do it? And so the conference then generated a group of visitors. They came last year, and we showed them around, and very gracious hosts in our city, from mayors to jails. And then this year, another group came, and just the opportunity was right for me to also go. So that's the larger context of the visits. What is interesting to me is that ultimately, because of language and everything else, and realizing that we had learned a lot from each other again, I was only getting one part of the story. So I exceeded to go. And so from early May to the 22nd, 23rd, of April, I was in Russia. And so I'll show you a map of the areas that I was at. So I started in Moscow for the first few days, and then I went to the second place here called Perm. Very beautiful place, but definitely further from the capital. Then I spent a couple of days in 2 towns here in this area, which starts to border into places where there are no towns in Russia, at least large ones. So Yekaterinburg has about a million people. And that was where some of our guests had come from. Another guest had come from Perm, and then the others had come to Moscow. So while there was opportunity to go elsewhere, I very much wanted to see the same area where people, our exchange could take place, which turned out to be very positive for me. I'm next going to show you some of the trip. I guess the part that is very poignant to me to point out is that I really had very little knowledge of both the country and the formation of the Soviet Union. Not speaking the language, not having any real interest. It was one big blob in my head, and I was going in a mental risk of what am I really going to learn. So I took first very few tourist pictures, but a lot of everyday pictures, and I'll spare you those. I'll share with you just a few of the places and the people we met, because it sets up some commentary that I want to show you. But of course, I have to start you with Moscow, because Moscow, Red Square, it's the image of Russia that I had in my head. So Moscow at night, I ended up close to it, and so we worked most of the day, but when things were very late at night, I would go out, and the streets were very safe, and so I could walk around and meet people. So, Moscow is on the far west side. It is the Europe side of that country, but as you can see to the far right, it's huge. In fact, I learned Russia is actually further east than China. That is, Miss Palin could see Russia from her house in a sense, because it's so far. It is right next to Alaska, but it also has North Korea right next to it here at the bottom, in China and Japan. And that's important because the influx of people is huge from many different sides. So the great theaters, the great architecture, why didn't anybody tell me that there was such richness of buildings, of lighting? This happens to be the KGB building that's being repaired, but so many beautiful buildings that are repaired and done. Just that surprised me. The amount of richness of Moscow was, glaring to a tourist eye, especially one that was so ignorant as mine. The part that I did go for, though, was very motivated by Valentina Chupik, who was here for a whole month. And so then I went along in her job. And her job as a what does she call herself? A free immigration lawyer, is to go around and find people in trouble. And then, in the streets, usually calls of all types. And so we interviewed a lot of immigrants. At their workplace, on the street. And so where do people come from? Where do people immigrate? To Central Asia. I finally learned from Georgia, from Azerbaijan, Armenia, and then most of the people that I had contact with, as you'll see in this picture, actually come from Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and then Tajik. The Tajiks also come. Kazakhstan doesn't actually, even though it's closer and bigger, it doesn't share a lot of immigrants right now. But we interviewed them in their workplace, and we got to know what it is that they do, how much they earn, where they live. This picture is actually where some construction workers are working in the area, but they did not allow migrants working in the work site that I'm showing you. So it was very interesting that I called them my paisanos, even though they're not from my country, but I felt like it's many of the immigrants I've worked with, marginalized in many ways, and definitely working within shut doors. If you go out, when he picked us up, it was a very scary thing for him because over there, regular police pick up immigrants and deport them. But the important thing for us was to interview and see their conditions. And then in many situations, riding the subway and getting to places and then meeting the families in their homes. Beautiful little Kyrgyz little girl and a baby just born. In this particular flat of 4 rooms, 4 different families lived, and one room was for this princess, the baby, and mom and dad. But situations very similar to the ones I've encountered with different immigrants here. They be, in the U.S. In Philadelphia, I used to encounter a lot of Koreans and Chinese, and Indonesians, but Mexicans, Latinos of different kinds. When they're undocumented. In Russia, when people arrive, they actually don't come illegally. That is, they can walk through what is the border with their countries, and there's no inspection. There is no border. They only get in trouble with the law because if they start to work, then the immigration system says, no, if you don't have a work permit, you can't work. And that's important because we eventually, at the end of my period there, we ran a little conference, and we titled it very much the same. Oh, excuse me. It's never happened before. We titled it Borders. Well, here we titled it Borders at Our Door. There we titled it Border at Our Door, because people arrive with no inspection, then every institution handles the immigrant as if it were their first arrival. Hospitals, schools, police, every institution then has essentially a border at their door because they have to learn or not how to handle the paperwork. Most often it's not, and in many situations, as Valentina has shared in this program, it's a very harsh situation. That is, people are deported because they were picked up because the police wanted to shake them down for $30, and if they didn't have the $30, they get taken in and deported. Let me go back to the pictures for a second. I also got to see the formal places where immigrants, in this case refugees, are handled. This is a picture of the National Refugee Center, basically. And there we had to go. We had to go because there was a lawyer who had an immigrant who had they had done the paperwork wrong, and he essentially could either leave for 7 years or create become illegal. It's a long story, but the fact was, the interesting for me was that it was a lawyer calling Valentina to help resolve the problem. When we walked into the center, hundreds of people in the halls waiting to be interviewed to document their refugee status. At the time, there was, in my eyes, were very lit up because the Crimean situation had already started. In fact, it was probably the reason that really tipped us over the edge to say, yes, I'll go, because it might not happen again. We already had lots of Ukrainian people at this center telling their stories. And then in those days, the UN actually declared that they could be considered refugees, and therefore they had a legitimate need to be requesting refugee status. And I have to tell you that's probably the thing that, it's so far away from us, it doesn't really matter. But what happens to us professionals, regular people, when there's a potential war, and you're just, in this case, a teacher, and she says, what am I going to do? I work for the state. The state is crumbling. We don't know whether it's going to be here tomorrow. What if we split into two nations? And so many of the people that Valentina talked to just needed to understand the process. What would qualify you as a refugee? What happens when your paperwork is wrong? What are the timelines? Sharing her card, and I tried to hide people's identity as much as I could. It's really tough, and regular people are going through this in the Ukraine. But of course, it's happened, and it will continue to happen across the world, including the many migrants that come to our town, immigrants. They call their word of choice is migrants instead of immigrants, and so I've now fallen to that, at least for a little while. So anyway, my time in Moscow at the beginning was interviewing people, and then I went to a little town called Perm, a smaller town, and this situation was excellent for me because I went to a human rights training with a group of school teachers, about 20 of them. I spent that day with them, and my host, Andre, who had been here for 24 hours in our town, he had arranged this. That was one of the things. He's a professor at the local pedagogic university, but he did trainings on the side with an organization. And these teachers were so engaged in their work, learning about human rights and how they would. This is the principal of one of the schools I was visiting from the region. So engaged, so committed to learning and seeing how their towns are going to integrate and work out the experience of what happens when these people come from, in the Ukraine, or where danger is so hard. Telling them I'm coming from the U.S. and then, I was born in Mexico, just, it's just like people from the republics within. In my ignorance, I had no idea. I thought the Soviet system was Russia and all the little republics around it, or all the other countries that got absorbed. I did not realize that within Russia there are many republics. The present Russian Federation, it is a federation of republics, and each one of them can have their own ethnic groups and their own language and their own interests, and they were brought together in what we call Russia, but it's not like our states. There are rights within those republics that transfer up or not. And so anyway, many of these teachers had situations like that already, and not having a Soviet system made it so that they're also integrating as much as they're receiving new people. So then I went, my second day in Perm, I also went to the market, guided by a young student from this pedagogic university who was very afraid to go into the market because she didn't know very many immigrants. So I had the immigrant experience, she had the language. And so we walked through and we met this man here. Farhat is from Tajikistan, but Uzbek ethnicity, and he runs the local group and the local help center for immigrants. His office is located above a restaurant, and behind the office is a made-up mosque. That is, he's got all the praying situations, place to wash and to do on Friday nights. But we found so much in common after 15, 20 minutes of making sure we were who we thought we were with each other. We had a wonderful experience of sharing in this endeavor, like the CU Immigration Forum members in this town, just devoted to doing good for other people, regardless of where they came from. They definitely have several countries that they do work with. And so Farhat became a good bouncing a wall to bounce ideas off of, and they're also working through a license problem with their immigrants, and so it was very interesting to compare notes. Later fed us and gave us the full tour. Very, very much respected member of the community. Let me make a little parenthesis here for this group. That night, after Farhat, walking around the city quite a bit, I ended up in a little anti-cafe where you pay a couple of dollars per hour, and you can drink as much coffee and tea as you want with all the cookies and everything else. And this group of young people, on a Sunday night, 7:30 p.m., were having a debate. It was a debate club. There's no, if you will, adults. They just set up a chairman, and they set up a pro team and a con team, and they debate a proposition. They do it to practice English, but they're all Russian. And so there was a very, in this case, the proposition was, our kids should leave their parents' home and not live with their parents. And in a country where it's permissible to stay home until you're 30, it was controversial. So it was very interesting to see them. This is a phenomenon. Such geeky kids, young people working on their language skills in this kind of setting. It was beautiful. I don't have time to go through the whole thing, except that I can tell you that it was a lovely time to be working in Perm with very regular people. People that said on Sunday nights afterwards, I've got to, I can't stay out. Full meals, full everything to drink, everything. And they say, well, I've got to go home to the kids because tomorrow's a school day. Working with the lawyers there and learning about the services they provide. And then meeting, in this case, the ombudsman for human rights. She was so gracious, as many other people. I'll just use her as an example. After talking to her for a few minutes, she looked around and she wanted to give me a gift. And I don't know, this is a book from their region, but I thought it so interesting because, of course, trying to be light on luggage, I had very little to give, little U of I trinkets. And she looked around and said, we are in the same wavelength, regular people trying to work to better our communities. And so Tatiana here showed me the sign. It's not the nano sign. It's actually Uh, their town is known for its salt mines, and apparently centuries ago, when people worked on the salt mines, they got bright red ears. And so anyone who was from Perm, you could tell where they went anywhere because their ears were red because they worked on the salt mines. And so that's the sign that you're local now. So it was a beautiful experience. I want to show you, to update you, because of the situation that we had here when we visited people last year. This group is, well, too much. Rafael and Leo were here last year visiting us, immigrant advocates, but mostly service. Leo and his wife, I went to visit them in Sarechny, a little town literally surrounded by woods and being part of the woods and everything else, where they receive immigrants, where they house them, and where they provide them with all the information they'll need in their new country, and meeting with immigrant advocates in that town. It was so rich to see people and work and see that we're working on the same kind of problems and trying to find solutions. I learned much from them. They also made me honorary Kurdic with all of the full dress and everything. So it was very interesting. Let me finish on this. These two pictures. On the left is the director of employment center in his country that prepares people to travel abroad and learn and just connects them with employers in Russia, Kurdic. And we're standing on the line that separates Asia from Europe. Of course, it's imaginary, and they just made a monument to say on the left-hand side, as you can see, is Asia, and then I'm on the European side. And then after having spent the day with him and talking about our situation, he says, you need to come to my country. And I'm like, it's far enough to go to Europe. And he says, well, I'm going to pull you to Asia, and you have to come over here and stay for a little while. We have a lot to learn from each other. It was a wonderful experience to be with so many people of so many countries, and realizing that we had really so many things in common. Borders are made up by people. The physical situation is something that I have to keep reminding myself. This is just made up for right now. When wars happen, as it's happening in the Ukraine and Russia, as it happened here in Texas, New Mexico with Mexico, or if you think the line between Canada and the United States is straight, just look it up. It's crazy. We humans make up rules about what happens on one side of the line or not, but ultimately we're regular people trying to make the best with what we've got. And if we hear that there's something better on the other side, behind those woods, who cares if it's a different country? It's the attitude that I come back with, and I wish so much to implement as we work through CU Immigration Forum, work with you, the community, to develop plans to make it better. The immigrants that we have in our town, there might be a federal law that permits them or not to be here, but ultimately they're all just residents. They're workers, they have kids, they have families, and they're regular people just living in our community, paying the same taxes that we all do, whether we rent or buy at the grocery store. So it's the attitude that I like to leave you with as one of the benefits that I had from Russia. I'll do one more show on this for the heady academic stuff, but I can tell you that this experience has enriched my life tremendously, and I hope that it enriches our work here. Thank you very much for listening. I'm Ricardo Diaz, working at CU Immigration Forum and trying to do our best here. So thank you for listening. Until next time.